I'm going to discuss moose, rats, and bugs on this hot take. I'm really going to take a deep dive into the U.S. Institute for Peace and a ruling by Judge Beryl Howell denying Donald Trump the ability to eradicate it on summary judgment. She's not even stopping her order to allow Donald Trump time to appeal. But we've got a guy named Mr. Moose, who was the head of U.S. Institute for Peace, who's also filed a new affidavit with Judge Beryl Howell, who says now that he's been reinstated by her, he's gone into the building and it's filled with rats and bugs, all courtesy of Elon Musk and Doge. Let's break it down now that I got your attention here on Legal AF. The U.S. Institute for Peace was formed in 1984 by Ronald Reagan. Yes, it's an executive agency, but was created by Congress to promote diplomacy and peace around the world. Those are four-letter words for Donald Trump. He got rid of USAID, which is another organization giving billions of dollars of humanitarian aid as a form of diplomacy and to promote U.S. interests around the world. He shuttered consulates and embassies and field offices for diplomacy in the State Department around the world, while Marco Rubio, who on paper is the Secretary of State, but not really, has been asleep at the switch. And now he tried to shutter in February, based on one of those executive orders, the U.S. Institute for Peace. It doesn't exercise executive power, as Beryl Howell, the judge in D.C., has declared. No, its focus is research on education, on scholarship. It operates in war zones in order to promote the U.S. interest. But Doge got rid of it, fired everybody, fired the board, fired all the employees, and took over the building and turned it over to the General Services Administration and kicked everybody out. And it went so fast, or as Beryl Howell called it in an early order of hers, a bull in the china shop moment, that she didn't even have time to actually enter an injunction. You know, that's a bad teachable moment for Donald Trump. He learned that if he's ferocious, and if he combines his ferocity with velocity, he can actually overcome a federal judge's ability to control him. Because by the time it got to court, even though it was just hours or days after all of this happened, it was too late. Doors were shut. Board was fired. She could have ordered to reinstate all of these people, but she denied earlier temporary restraining orders. But now she issued, just about a week or so ago, an order on summary judgment, siding with the U.S. Institute for Peace, and declaring that Donald Trump violated separation of powers and his authority under Article 2 of the Constitution. She is setting up a new challenge in her order to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court is chipping away at a body of case law started in 1937 or 35 called Humphrey's Executor. We've talked a lot about it. We've talked so much about it on Legal AF and the Midas Touch Network. We should print up shirts that says, "I support Humphrey's Executor." It's the name of a case. A guy named Humphreys got fired by Herbert Hoover back in the day from the Federal Trade Commission, and it was which was created by Congress, and ruled that without cause, in other words, it's not enough that he was just a Republican and Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to get rid of him. And the court sided with Humphreys in the case, setting the standard for when a president can fire people who are in agencies, but it's not unlimited. And then they reaffirmed it in 2020 in another case called Celia Law. So Judge Beryl Howell is kind of setting it all up here, because in her view, Humphrey's Executor is still alive and kicking until the Supreme Court says otherwise. And we are waiting for them to say otherwise, combined with Celia Law. And she said, look, U.S. Institute for Peace, it's not exercising any executive power. It's not, because if it's exercising executive power, then what the Supreme Court has effectively ruled recently in a case involving the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Service Protection Board with Kathy Harris and Gwen Wilcox, that Trump had the power to fire them because they exercised executive branch agency or executive branch power as part of their agency. And therefore, the statute that Congress created that says you can only fire them for cause is actually a violation of the separation of powers and infringes on Article 2 powers of the president. But even with that ruling, it doesn't mean, as Judge Beryl Howell pointed out in her 102-page decision, it doesn't mean that the president is limitless. It doesn't mean he can fire every subordinate, anybody that's below him, just because he's the president of the United States. And she's challenging now, Beryl Howell, the Supreme Court to take back up Humphrey's executor and to say, well, you got rid of Wilcox, you got rid of the head of the NLRB, effectively putting it out of business, and you got rid of the head of the Merit Service Protection Board, putting it out of business. What are you going to do now? What are you going to do with the Institute for Peace, which Congress has reaffirmed with funding every year since 1984? So in her ruling, she describes, I'm going to read it to you in a minute, how the takeover happened in very unsavory terms for the Trump administration. Shouldn't surprise anybody. She called it blunt force takeover, backed up by law enforcement from 3 separate agencies, all in her view unconstitutional and illegal. Let me just read to you, and then I'm going to get to the moose, the rat, and the bugs. I promise you, it's coming. So in Judge Beryl Howell's order, she says, 2 days after this court granted summary judgment to the United States Institute for Peace, this is her order denying his stay. Defendants Trump, various Doge administrators, and the new purported president of the USIP filed a motion to stay that judgment pending appeal. This court declared that President Trump's termination of that Peace Institute and its board members violated the statutory removal protections that Congress had put in place. And because those protections posed no constitutional problem, the terminations were null and void. In other words, they were unconstitutional. This court also declared null and void actions taken as a result of those improper removals, including removing and replacing the ambassador. See, he's an ambassador, Ambassador Moose, who isn't thinking of Rocky and Bullwinkle at this moment, by the way, just an aside, as well as the transfer of property and other actions taken by those illegitimately installed replacements. This court has then ordered the plaintiff's board and Ambassador Moose remain in their leadership positions and may not be treated as having been removed. And then she says, I'm not giving you a stay. It was an improper exercise of presidential power. She goes on to say that Humphrey's executor is still law, citing to other cases. And she says, contrary to the suggestions that the recent decisions that the Supreme Court just made about the NLRB and the Merit Service Protection Board, the Harris and Wilcox case, she said that does not help you, Trump, because in those, the Supreme Court made a decision that they exercised considerable executive power and thus invoked concerns about limits on the president to remove them. But as explained in the memo, she says, the United States Institute for Peace exercises less executive power than such agencies. It is a uniquely structured quasi-private entity in the distinct historical tradition of the first and second banks of the United States. There she's quoting effectively Roberts in his recent decision, which I think is very smartly done by Justice Beryl Howell. Now, the reason I want to talk about Ambassador Moose, I just love saying that out loud, is that he filed an affidavit claiming that he finally got back into the building. He filed it on the 23rd. I got a copy of it now. I'm going to put it up in Filings AF on Legal AF Substack. He got into the building, and here's what he says. That there was a failure to maintain and secure the building. On paragraph 10, Ambassador Moose says Vermin were, among other things, they reported evidence of rats and roaches in the building. Ambassador Moose then had to write vermin were not a problem prior to March 17th, 2025. I would suggest we have a vermin problem in the White House, but we'll leave that for another hot take. Staff has also reported other problems, water leaks, cooling tower, garage doors, missing tiles, all sorts of things, letting this fall into disrepair, which is remarkable. Thank you, Mr. Moose, Ambassador Moose, which is remarkable because the building allegedly was turned over to the General Services Administration division of the Trump administration, which is responsible for maintaining buildings. It's not going to help the cause. So here's what's going to happen next. Beryl Howell, to support her earlier order against the Trump administration trying to put the Humpty Dumpty back together again of US Aid Institute, will now not allow them to she won't stay her order to give them time to go to the appellate court. The appellate court is the D.C. Court of Appeals, where they have filed. We'll see how quickly on an emergency basis, whether they admit or whether they allow a stay at that level. I think that'll be denied. And then they'll take an emergency application. What else? That'll be like number 20 at the U.S. Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to decide, starting with Chief Justice Roberts, whether they're going to block this order of Beryl Howell. You're going to hear me talk a lot over the summer about whether Beryl Howell's orders are going to be blocked, because she has a number of cases, including those involving law firms that she has reinstated to allow them to do work in front of the federal agencies because Donald Trump retaliated against them. She's got a whole series of orders. And keep your eye on Beryl Howell, because she knows Donald Trump well. She rents space for free in his brain. He's in real estate. She's in real estate. The real estate she's in is occupying his room in his cranium. Because remember, she's the judge that, as when she was chief judge of the DC circuit, she presided over all of the grand jury proceedings leading to Mar-a-Lago and the criminal prosecution, leading to the DC election interference case and the criminal prosecution. And she single-handedly stripped away from a number of Donald Trump lawyers their attorney-client privilege and forced them to testify against him. And so there's no love lost between the two. It's really on the Trump side. She's just doing her job. So until I'm just doing my job. You're here. You're doing your job. Let's all do it together. Hit the subscribe button here. Help us continue to grow this. We need more audio downloads over on the Legal AF podcast, which I do on the Midas Touch Network. And we got a Legal AF Substack where I'm going to be posting all of these documents I just discussed today on Legal AF Substack under, these will be under Filings AF. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.